everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
Tying all these together is where the magic is going to happen, because you're 100% right. Each interface right now as a one-to-one standalone doesn't unleash the value that we're talking about. And these systems have to be smart in the sense that if I ask a question, if I say, what movies are playing tonight, the system has to know the best way to present this information is on a screen and I might ask the question to an Alexa, mic somewhere in my house, and then get the information on my iPhone. And so tying all this together to create the ultimate multimodal user experience, I think, is where most of the work is going to happen over the next 2-3 years.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for our show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Tobias Dengel, president of WillowTree. Welcome to the show today.
Great to be here, Scott. Thank you for having me.
I remember about 5 years ago or so, almost consecutively every year at CES, they couldn't stop talking about Alexa. Alexa connected to furnitures, connected to toiletries, any kind of devices, you name it, in and out of home and office, in the car. But of course, Alexa actually was quite disappointing. I think even for those that interface with the TV and some of the other apps have found that it's very limiting. So I wanted to start with the big question of what have been some of the big shortcomings and disappointments when it comes to voice assistants like Siri and Alexa.
So Scott, that exact question was what we started wrestling with about 5 years ago, because there was such momentum in the space and such adoption at first from consumers, but then not consistent usage. And we asked ourselves, why were people interested in it? And then what happened? It turns out people are primarily interested in voice because it's so much faster than typing, right? And you can type at about a third of the speed on a keyboard, about a fifth of the speed on a mobile device that you can speak. So we all want to speak to our devices. The problem is we don't want to listen. And all the early voice experiences were really two-way voice assistants, which is natural. Anytime there's a new technology, you mimic what we know as humans, and what we know as humans as voice is call and response. But the reality is we don't want to listen. We actually want devices to do something, or more importantly, respond to us with text or with graphical replies, which is much, much faster than listening, right? So the example I always use is, yes, you want to use Alexa or Siri and ask what movies are playing tonight. You don't want to listen to Alexa and Siri give you 3 movies with 5 showtimes each. You want to see that on a screen right away, and then just say, all right, I need 2 tickets, 8 p.m. Star Wars. That's the cycle of communication that we're all aspiring to. So it's really multimodal, not just voice.
So you bring up an excellent point about this, because again, I think there's efficiency, but it's basically the expectation of us as a user. We want efficiency on our side, but from a output, our efficiency isn't necessarily voice back. But there's other types of shortcomings as well. I think more than that is that they were very prescriptive. You had to use very precise language. So even other types of natural language processing, speech to text that were integrated into OEMs for automobile, for instance, you have to be very clear and very prescriptive on the kind of taxonomy and the nomenclature that you have to use for the windows to roll down, for the AC to go up or down. And it's those kind of limiting factors that I think at some point people just kind of got fed up, right?
100%. And obviously LLMs are going to unlock that for us in a big way, because that's what LLMs are so good at. So I think it's a big driver of the voice adoption that I think we're just starting right now. There were other issues as well. Discoverability was one. You didn't know what Alexa and Siri knew how to do, and you didn't know what apps might be integrated with it. There was a big trust factor. If I'm getting my bank account information through Alexa, does that mean Amazon now knows my, what my account balance is? And so all those things laddered up to much lower adoption than I think was initially envisioned. And the early indications were, if you look at how fast Alexa got adopted into households and how fast we started using Siri, initial indications were this was going to go very, very quickly. And now we've had a pullback. But I think this second wave that's going to be LLM powered is going to be much more powerful and much more persistent.
Now, at the time of this recording, of course, we've seen about Microsoft having some negative press lashback in terms of integrating their large language model into Windows. And exactly to your point, we're on a lot of these privacy issues in terms of what it actually has access to, and did the user, in fact, explicitly opt in. But let's go back to your book, The Sound of Future, The Coming Age of Voice Technology. You and your co-author wrote this before OpenAI or any other types of Gen AI types of platforms were launched. So I'm curious, now that you have a bit of hindsight, would your book, and if so, how would you have revised the book based on what you're seeing today?
Yeah, so we actually published it in October of 23. And so, the publishing cycles are so long. That means the book had to be in its final manuscript by May, early June 23. So ChatGPT had been launched 3.5. So we do reference that in the book. But again, we didn't know exactly how, at the time, it was more of a novelty than an entire industry trend. Now, in the book, we predicted that all these LLM models would become multimodal. And I think we're now sitting here in early June of 24. In the last month, OpenAI especially, but also some of the other platforms have announced these multimodal approaches that really are very directly in line with what we thought was going to happen. And I think the next thing to happen over the next 1 to 2 years is I think these capabilities are going to get implemented into the applications that we already use. So if you're a Capital One user, as an example, your primary interface with your Capital One app might be voice, I think, over the next 12 to 24 months to do all the things that you do with the app today, but just much, much more efficiently. We think that's a better entry point into these experiences with the brands that you do business with than going through like a Siri layer or an Alexa layer, which in the book we equate to being somewhat similar to AOL, right? It was a walled garden. It was the starting point. But eventually that all broke down and you just went directly to the website of the company that you're working with. There's no reason to use Siri to get to Capital One. When you have the Capital One app, you tap on it and you're in it, then you start your voice experience or your multimodal experience.
Now, recently, at the timing of recording this particular podcast, we've had a number of direct-to-consumer products like Rabbit AI and others that really embodies a very small footprint computational device that has just the voice component. And you speak to it and it basically goes to the cloud to retrieve certain data. Now, there's, of course, a lot of limitations and issues around latency, computation, and limitations of integration, lack of integration with apps. With that said, it's showing that, again, at least those early prototypes have some real drawbacks, have some real limitations. And I wonder if voice is really the true game changer. And I'll give more of an anecdotal example. My son, who's a high school teenager, probably in a given week, probably grunts a few words here and there, fragmented sentences, probably not even cumulative of 3 to 5 minutes per week. So is voice really going to be that revolutionary?
Yeah, I think it is, but I think, again, it's going to be on the devices and integrated into the platforms we already use every day. I'm not convinced at this point that these standalone devices that take advantage of the thesis here, like Rabbit, et cetera, are going to be the future, because I don't think consumers want another device. I think it's really about integrating into current devices. I will say, I have a 16-year-old too, and I would say that's analogous. I do also have an 11-year-old, and the 11-year-old comes down every morning and starts engaging with all the devices that we have, whether it's the television, whether it's a Google Home device, and he does the entire thing by voice. And he's asking what the scores were from the games last night. He's asking what the weather's going to be, and then he's seeing the display. It's not a voice-to-voice interaction. So, and when he watches television, he expects that he can just tell his remote control what he wants to watch. And so I think when you look at the data, it's actually quite interesting. It's a bathtub adoption curve right now, where you see a lot of adoption in youth, and you see a lot of adoption in folks over 65. And the reason that the folks over 65 are adopting it is because they've never gotten comfortable typing, especially on mobile devices. It's not something they had to do in their youth, et cetera. So they're immediately hopping to these voice experiences as they become available to them.
So I actually find this primary research, ethnographic and psychographic, very interesting. And I think you're referring to the alpha generation, where they effectively grew up with it and they just push a button and tell Siri to send a text message, or they're used to essentially using that as a primary HMI or human machine interface. And to your point, for the baby boomers and those that are less tech savvy, it's a lot easier than having to fumble around the different types of functions, buttons, and workflow to make things work. So very interesting, very polar, but at the same time, I think there's an argument that certainly from a business productivity, there are some real potential gains. Matter of fact, in the book, you make an argument that voice take will increase efficacy and convenience and drive down costs, boost productivity, and empower entirely new business models. I wonder if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I think it's going to evolve the way mobile evolved, right? It's at first it was, the internet in your pocket, and then over 3, 4, 5 years, entrepreneurs developed new business models that were entirely around this new capability of an always on, always with you experience. And so one of the examples we use on the book is Uber, right? When Steve Jobs rolled out the iPhone in 2008, I don't think anyone at that point said, who's in real trouble? The taxi industry. It took 2 or 3 years for ride hailing to become a thing. And that's the same trend we're going to see with voice. And in the book, we go through a number of different industries and do some thought experiments on what banking might look like, or what quick serve restaurants might look like if in a voice first environment. And McDonald's, as an example, is pushing on this. They acquired a voice company 2 years ago, but I still think they're very they're thinking very linearly. How have they used voice? They've used it to automate the drive-through, which has a bunch of issues, right? You have ambient noise, you might have music in the car, you have multiple people in the car, whereas voice really should get rid of the drive-through window altogether, right? It should be, you just tell your app, hey, I want 2 cheeseburgers and a Coke, and it's ready for pickup. And then when you start thinking about, well, what does that mean? It changes how you might configure an entire McDonald's, or how casual restaurants even are organized. If you don't have a waiter today, a waiter or waitress spends a big chunk of their time taking what you've transmitted to them as an order and trying to put it into a device, right? And so all this friction that's in the system is going to go away. I was just at my physician yesterday, and he was, the entire time I was with him, he was typing things into a computer. And it's just, it just makes no sense, right? Because the second I say what he's asking me, the information is there. It should be picked up by the device. The device should be analyzing it real time. He should be able to focus on me. And then the system's working in the background, recording all the information, maybe making some suggestions. But it's getting rid of all these frictions that happen in the world right now that we think is so exciting.
So I really like this example. And the reason is, I think there's just too many companies and organizations that think about business process improvements or innovation in the context of, here's the current status quo, workflow or process, and we're just going to look for those small tweaks, when in fact, you really need to think about it from a fundamental rehaul. It calls for a redesign where you're collapsing those different sets of events or touch points so that you can collapse it down to essentially one. Driveway is a great example of that. And imagine the savings where you do away with all the infrastructure that's needed for drive-through, because there's cost in that, right? And then being able
Huge
to actually, right, and being able to just simply use your mobile app to be able to order and just simply pick up. Love that. And I think we really have to fundamentally change the way we think about these new forms of technologies. Again, I think we are a little bit hyper-focused around Gen AI these days, but exponential technologies, how do we incorporate it in such a way that we really get the significant gains? Now, one of the claims that you make in your book is that these voice texts will not just improve the way we communicate with machines by 10, 20%, but possibly a factor of 5 to 10x. Do you have any data to support that claim?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to how much faster we can speak than we can type, and how much less specific we need to be, especially when coupled with LLMs, right? So by definition, you get a 3x improvement if you're just speaking versus typing. But if now you're layering LLMs that are doing a lot of the interpretation and the correction, you can quickly get to those kinds of massive efficiency gains that are very interesting, because most of the efficiency gains that have happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years have been in more blue-collar manufacturing. We've automated everything in manufacturing, but a lot of traditional white-collar jobs in education, in healthcare, in data entry, they haven't changed. I mean, the efficiency improvements over the last 20, 30 years have been quite marginal. And I think this efficiency gain is now coming into the white-collar workplace, which has largely been insulated from all these kind of pressures over the last few decades.
I want to bring up somewhat of a dated example. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, some of us used to wear something called Jawbone, which was a Bluetooth device for speaking, and it would be integrated into your phone, for example. And depending on how that person is facing, sometimes you see people on the streets or in the lobby, and it looks like they're just talking to themselves. The reason I bring this up is I think there are compelling use cases for voice, but in many cases, it's not as appropriate. And certainly in a white-collar professional office environment, the last thing you want to do is have every possible employee speaking out loud. I don't think that's probably what they want to do, and I don't think that's really realistic. But coming back to that a little bit later is the fact that it's not just a voice, it's not just a microphone hardware that we have to think about. We also have to think about the earpiece and the integration of that together, because of the fact that it's that ubiquity, it's the ability to be able to call upon the voice AI assistant anytime, regardless of where you are from a geolocation. So talk to us about how, when we say multimodal interfaces, and we talk about words, spoken words, screens, keyboards, sounds, haptics, and then the earbuds as an example, how do they all work together? And when we say voice, we don't really mean voice, do we? We're really talking about different types of interfaces, HMIs, that are working to communicate with machines and apps.
Yeah, so I mean, that's really the unlock here, is that voice is the I think the newest of these interfaces, right? But for this to work effectively, it's truly multimodal, and all these devices have to work together. And often they're these days coming from different platforms, right? So you have Apple, at least in North America, is the clear leader on your mobile device. But then we have Microsoft that's providing much of our software that we use at work, or it might be Google. And so tying all these together is where the magic is going to happen, because you're 100% right. Each interface right now as a one-to-one standalone doesn't unleash the value that we're talking about. And these systems have to be smart in the sense that if I ask a question, if I say, what movies are playing tonight, the system has to know the best way to present this information is on a screen and I might ask the question to an Alexa, mic somewhere in my house, and then get the information on my iPhone. And so tying all this together to create the ultimate multimodal user experience, I think, is where most of the work is going to have to happen over the next 2-3 years. And it's a lot of heavy integration work. and applying a lot of, what we call multimodal design to these experiences, which is a whole new way of thinking about how to design digital. For most of the last couple decades, digital design has been screen real estate design, and now it's going to completely shift to be multimodal.
What's interesting is I think about kind of abstraction layer. I'll give a quick example. At the time of this recording, SAP has made an acquisition into a company called WalkMe. And it's this app that sits on top of everything else to help users be able to work through different friction points in their workflow in a certain apps, whatnot. Similarly, it's this notion that we can address the interoperability of all the different hardwares that are out there. So the kind of superset AI, let's say, and we're talking about Gen AI for the most part currently, that sits on top of everything else. So you don't have to worry about, okay, did this one device give permission so that I can listen and then be able to give output, and vice versa? Can the refrigerator talk to my car talk to this and that, right? But it's this abstraction layer that sits on top of it, and you talk to that primary interface that then has the permissions to work through the different devices, different apps. I think that's really what we're talking about. Versus, like earlier in the conversation, we talked about this kind of closed garden where you had to use the iOS or had to use the Android or had to use the Amazon specific type of AI agent. That's not going to be the case anymore, right?
100%. I think there's going to be incredible opportunities opened up, either by helping develop that abstraction layer or facilitate it, or make use of that abstraction layer. But I think as entrepreneurs think about what's next, making use or contributing to that abstraction layer is a huge opportunity.
I want to talk about one of the most compelling use cases for voice, and I think you call it out, that has to do with safety, and in some cases, life or death. So let's say you're in a car accident. If you're in a car accident and you're bleeding, you're injured, the last thing you're going to do is pull out your phone and start trying to type and whatever it is. Similarly, whether it's transportation or it's heavy industries where there's accidents, when there's fire, when there's an explosion, you need urgent response. So talk to us about how these commands are becoming almost essential for these types of very specific use cases.
Yeah, so one of the examples we talk about is the Boeing 737 MAX accidents, which ultimately are because the pilots did not know how to tell the machine, and in this case, the plane, what to do. And they lost the ability to command. And the commands that a pilot transmits to a plane these days are largely either through a screen or through knobs or pedals. The future of the cockpit is going to be almost entirely voice-based, where the pilots can simply instruct the plane what they want it to do. And that's not science fiction. Both the United States Air Force and the Russian Air Force already have planes that operate in that way, because there's nothing more high pressure than operating in combat. So this is happening today. We in the book also highlight fire departments that are going to all voice-based interaction controls for the exact same reason. One of the, and this is not just safety, but one of the productivity aspects of voice is any job that in the industry is called hands-on, eyes up, right? It's where you need both hands to do something and you need your eyes. So, industrial applications might be working on assembly line or working in a warehouse, or outside of that, it might be law enforcement, et cetera, et cetera. But all of those applications really benefit from a voice-first experience, because if you look at how much time, even the police, you can see policemen, typing into their devices, which is totally antithetical to their, what they should be doing in terms of their productivity. So I think all of these things tie into this safety idea, but which also bleeds into productivity as well.
So for the remaining couple of minutes that we have, I want to extend our conversation around human-machine interface. We've been talking about voice and some of the more short-term things that's available to us, but one of the things we're starting to see beyond just AR, VR, and even contact lens around eye tracking, but even brain-computer interface. There's, of course, the invasive type, the one that Elon Musk and others are working on, for instance. But then there's also the EEG head caps, right? And even gait tracking or body movement. So computer vision cameras that can actually detect based on your movements, your body language. Maybe you're having a stroke, as an example. There's a lot that I think we tend to communicate through our body that systems can start to interpret that, oh, I think, he wants something, or he looks thirsty, or there's a need for this, or he's calling the car, for instance. Talk to us about the future of human-machine interface as we think about eye tracking, brain-computer interface, body movements or gaits, or even things that's hooked up to our smartwatches and smart rings that's tracking our biometrics and be able to actually determine potential recommendations as well as events.
Yeah, it's a super exciting area of research. At the end of the day, what we're all talking about here is how to make the communication between us and machines more efficient, and to some extent between human beings directly more efficient using all these tools. And I think 100% we're going to get to a point where we're going to have all this data, including, there's a lot of research that when human beings communicate with each other, over half of what gets communicated between two human beings is not from the actual words, it's from the tone, it's from the expression, et cetera, et cetera. And so, our parent company, we do a lot of work in contact centers and a lot of sentiment analysis. The problem is, and I think every problem is an opportunity, and I think a lot of research work is going to go into this, is there are cultural aspects to this, and there are also individual aspects to this. There are people that are naturally come across as more friendly or less friendly, and there's huge differences between cultures. One of the experiments one of our large clients, we've kind of globally been working on feedback for some of the applications we're working, and Germany consistently scores below the United States. And so the first question was like, well, what's wrong with the German app? There's nothing wrong with the German app. They're just more critical as a culture. And so, and then even within any culture, there are large gradations. So I think to make this very, very effective, there's going to be a ton of research on how to personalize it, so that it actually is accurate. Like my tone might be quite different when I get angry than someone else's, or what triggers me to get angry might be higher or lower than someone else. And so I think for this to be effective, there's a ton of work that still has to get done in that personalization direction.
Well, sounds very exciting. There's a lot of opportunities ahead. And with that, I have been joined by Tobias Dengel, president of WillowTree. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Scott.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.